Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with the New American. Thanks for watching Conversations That Matter. Today we have a very special guest for you, a friend of mine, James Simpson. And if you are at all in conservative world, you definitely know James. He's been published in some of the greatest conservative publications out there. He's been in Breitbart, Daily Caller, Washington Times, PJ Media, you name it. He's been published there. He's also an economist, an investigative journalist, a businessman, author. He served in the White House through multiple administrations. And he's been in a lot of the best conservative documentaries out there exposing the subversive threat trying to undermine our nation. He's been in Enemies Within with our friend Trevor Loudon, Agenda, Sabotage, you name it, he's been there. And he has a new book out now called Who Was Karl Marx? The Men, the Motives, and the Menace Behind Today's Rampaging American Left. And I really don't think you can understand what's going on out in the streets, the chaos that we're seeing, the mayhem, the anti-American hysteria without understanding this. Jim, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for writing this book. Um, Tell us a little bit about the men, the motives, and the menace behind today's rampaging American left.
Well, thanks, Alex. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, honestly, that title describes the entire book and it describes what is happening in our country today. But what most people don't get, this whole agenda seems to have just sprung out like a spring mushroom or something. Nobody recognizes the fact that they have been working assiduously to bring this about for 100 years or more. And in the United States, almost 100 years. And it has been a body of tactics that was developed in the 1860s. It was developed following the Communist Manifesto. And I name and describe the people that came up with the fundamental strategies, which have not changed. I mean, they call themselves progressives. There's nothing progressive about them. They are regressive. All the way back to the mid 1800s, or actually before, when they were inspired by the French Revolution, where people were being beheaded with guillotines. And in fact, in the book, I point out Frances Fox Piven, whom some of your readers may be familiar with as the co-author of the Cloward-Piven Crisis Strategy. She's still alive. She's 89 years old, and she's still talking like a street revolutionary. And she was interviewed, of all places, by Jacobin magazine. And the Jacobins were the ones who were beheading everybody in the French Revolution. So I thought it was just perfect. It was a perfect place for her. But yeah, so this is a century plus strategy to utterly destroy the West. And the Antifa BLM folks we see out in the street today, they are not an anomaly. They are the tip of the spear. They are exactly like the Venezuelan red shirts that fought, beat, killed people who opposed the continued presidency of Hugo Chavez and then his successor, Maduro. And it's the exact same organization, the exact same mindset. And they are restrained right now because the left have not obtained full control of the electoral system. They're working very hard to, and if Nancy Pelosi gets her For the People Act passed and Biden signs it, we will probably never see a free election again. And if you think what they're doing is bad now, just wait to find out what happens when they have complete and total unchallengeable power.
Yeah, Jim, America was a tough nut to crack for the communists, and they knew that. They wrote about it for a long time. But As you mentioned, this has been going on for over a century. Talk, if you would, some of the tactics. How did they get us from this liberty-loving, independent-minded Christian nation, where we were so free and so prosperous, we really had very little to complain about, to where we are today? I mean, what are some of the key tactics that they use? And I know there's too many we could to talk about, but what are some of the key ones that brought us from there to here?
Well, my favorite person to quote, who I'm sure you're familiar with, but many people are almost certainly not, is Willy Munzenberg, who was a German communist in Vladimir Lenin's inner circle before the October Revolution in 1917. And he said he was a key speaker. He was kind of that day's George Soros. He ran thousands of newspapers. He had theaters and all kinds of operations across Europe that would covertly push the Soviet line, kind of like what we have today with our mass media. But but he was a brilliant guy, brilliant organizer. He was a hardcore true believer, and he was a key speaker at the Comintern meetings, Communist International meetings in the early 20s that they held at the Soviet Union, and all the top leaders of the communist parties of the world would come and listen and get ideas. And at that time, he said, in 1919, he said, we must organize the intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink. Because only then, when we have corrupted all its values and made life impossible, can we impose the dictatorship of the proletariat. So that was the pretext and the inspiration for the creation of the School for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany in 1923. And another key opinion leader or theorist, if you will, in that milieu was Georgy Lukács, who was the Assistant Minister of Culture in the Hungarian Soviet Republic in 1919. And that was very short-lived, lasted only a few months. It was weak. It was shortly after World War I, and the Hungarian people were horrified when they realized what this government was all about. And when they were invaded by Romania, nobody would fight. so, so they had to flee. But Georgy Lukács created a program that he called cultural terrorism. And following on what Munzenberg said, he came up with the idea of using sexual degeneracy as a weapon against Christian morality, against morality generally, and against the West. And he called it cultural terrorism. And what was it? It was an explicit sex education to children in school. It was a nationwide campaign telling women to leave their husbands and go sow their wild oats. I mean, the whole thing, it was like the 1919 version of San Francisco Free Love. But because it was a very conservative Catholic nation, rather than going with the flow, they were, for the most part, pretty outraged. But that idea became the inspiration for the Frankfurt School, the School for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany, which, as you know, had to flee Nazi Germany in 1933, came to the U.S. and was resettled at the Columbia Teachers College, where they created what they called critical theory. And of course, critical theory goes all the way back to Marx, who said we must engage in a ruthless criticism of everything existing, and he meant everything existing of Western culture. And so they created what now we know as cultural Marxism or political correctness, but it was critical theory, which criticizes everything about the West and promotes things like degeneracy, drug use, crime, and immorality, sexual immorality. And they carried that forth. The New Left, the Students for a Democratic Society, were inspired by Herbert Marcuse, one of the chief members of the Frankfurt School. He was called the father of the sexual revolution, and credited with the phrase "make love, not war," even though he claims that isn't true. But it might as well be, because he promoted this. Lukács came up with the idea, and the Frankfurt School, and especially Marcuse, mainlined this into U.S. culture, and the goal was to destroy our Christian moral backbone, because that had been, not as Marx said, an opiate for the masses. That had been our chief source of strength and the inspiration for the U.S. Constitution and Declaration of Independence, which created the greatest society in history.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the Marxists have had different tactics for taking down different societies. They knew that what worked in Tsarist Russia wouldn't necessarily work in Western Europe or the United States. Um, so obviously, what they did in the United States is somewhat unique. But are there any parallels? Do we see parallels between the Marxist efforts in the United States and what we've seen in other countries? And what's the nexus with China? Is this really an international communist movement and China is a part of it, or is China just this outside threat for the United States? What does it look like at the international level here?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, as you know, the communist Chinese have been very actively involved in influencing and actually instigating the BLM Antifa riots in the United States. And BLM works closely with the Chinese Progressive Association, which is directly connected at the wrists and ankles to the Communist Chinese Party. And then there are so many. I mean, it would take days to go through all of the ways that the Communist Chinese have infiltrated the various institutions of our culture, our political class. So many people have their hands tied because they're basically paid agents of the Communist Chinese, even though they would never admit that, and the media would never report it that way. But I mean, just look at Joe Biden, and it's absurd. And when it comes to other countries, it's not so much that the agenda, at least in Western Europe, is any different than ours. They've actually been the canary in the coal mine, because Britain is ahead of us in terms of turning law enforcement against victims and in favor of criminals. It has been ahead of us in censoring Christian preachers. It has been ahead of us in being overwhelmed and yet maintaining open doors to massive, overwhelming immigration. And, for example, when the mass migration from Syria began in 2015, Angela Merkel, who was then Chancellor of Germany, Germany, flung the doors open to all those migrants, just like Joe Biden did this year. And at that time, I said, that's going to be what's coming here if we can't get control of our border, because the Democrats want open borders. They want that chaos. And that's exactly what's happening. That's what we see throughout Europe. We see almost daily terrorist, attacks in France, in Germany. Angela Merkel, who put herself out as a moderate or even conservative German politician, she's actually was the head of the communist youth in East Germany when she grew up. And I don't think she's ever abandoned that communist faith. I think when the wall fell, she was one of the many East German communists who penetrated West Germany in an effort to infiltrate and take it over. And they've done a pretty good job, because now Germany is in chaos. And it's entirely their doing. And now we're seeing those exact same tactics being applied here, especially with regard to the open borders agenda.
Yeah. So, Karl Marx, we're told that he was this guy who just had a different sense of morality. He was an atheist. He rejected these crude notions of God. And yet we
Right.
see him advocating for the wholesale extermination of entire people groups if they hadn't reached at the capitalist stage.
Yes.
Before we went on, we were talking a little bit about a book called Marx and Satan from Reverend Vermbrandt of Romania.
Yep.
Was Marx an atheist, or is there something more to this? What does the evidence show?
Well, um, as Wurmbrand pointed out in his book, which was an incredible book, and I essentially reiterate in my book, Marx was not an atheist. Marx believed in God. As you know, he was raised a Christian, and he even had beautiful Christian poetry in high school. But when he got off to college, yeah, he got in with the wrong crowd. Wurmbrand argued that they were Satanists, and I have not delved into that enough to know whether that's true or not. But they were definitely evil people, and he flipped 180 degrees. But the thing that always has stricken me is the poem that he wrote, which I line up with how God described Satan in Isaiah, because Marx describes himself, he wants to be equal to the Creator. And if you want, I'll just read that. I'll read that poem. With
Excellent.
disdain, I will throw my gauntlet full in the face of the world and see the collapse of this pygmy giant whose fall will not stifle my ardor. Then I will wander godlike and victorious through the ruins of the world, and giving my words an active force, I will feel equal to the Creator. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like somebody who's an atheist. That
It
sounds
does
like
not.
somebody he is he is flipping the finger at God and telling him, I'm equal to you. And
Yep,
that's,
it sure does.
and to, that is the pinnacle of an example of the kind of megalomaniacal arrogance that all leading communists demonstrate. I mean, Marx, and I argue this in the book, Marx was a personality type. He was absolutely selfish, greedy, petulant, vindictive, backstabbing, dishonest, every uh, description of a truly degenerate character that you could come up with. And in fact, he was the kind of person he claimed to want to destroy, to wipe out, so that they could create this wonderful new world order. And that poem of his closely uh, parallels with what God said to Satan in Isaiah 14. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High.
Yeah,
I mean, it's almost a paraphrase of what Marx said, isn't it?
it sure is. Yeah. So these people are wicked. They are now firmly entrenched in our institutions, really all over the country and all over the world. How do we resist this, Jim? Is it futile? Is resistance futile, or do you think there's a chance that freedom-loving Americans could turn the tide? Where do we go from here? What do we do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I actually, we all read and write books that talk about how horrendous things are, and oh, what are we going to do? And oh, I felt like a responsibility in this one to actually suggest some solutions that may well work. And I will not, polish that turd, so to speak, for lack of better way of putting it. We are in really, really desperate situation, and we are tottering on the precipice of national collapse. And if our country collapses, the entire world economy will collapse, and it will make the Great Depression look like a walk in the park. Because our economy supports the world economy. And you know, it even supports the communist Chinese economy. Without our economy, they're dead. And if they're going to destroy us, and that's their intention, they're going to go down with us. And it's the one inexplicable aspect of the entire communist agenda that I have theories about why it holds, but they will be destroyed. This will be an earth-ending event. So what can we do? Well, first of all, the left have been our best salesmen. They, whenever they get encouragement and power, they always overdo it. And now they've come completely out of the closet and shown us unequivocally exactly who they are, exactly what they're about. And the best face you can put on it is it's just simply horrendous. And as people come to see that affect them personally, they will begin looking for alternatives. And they already have. I mean, the whole issue with school boards around the country, where school boards are literally being taken over or being taken back from the left in many cases because people are absolutely outraged now that they've learned that this is the kind of garbage that their children are being taught. They're not being taught how to prosper, how to function in society. They're being taught how to destroy society, and it's gotten serious pushback. We need a heck of a lot more. We need to create essentially a parallel society where people have options when their state or their city government is doing insane stuff. Move somewhere else, and as they move out of blue states like California, like they are now, fleeing them, like the refugees were fleeing Syria, fleeing New York and California and New Jersey and all these places, they're going to start getting starved of funds, and that's a huge thing. And all politicians are going to start seeing the viability and the value of standing up for American culture, for American concepts, beliefs, for our capitalist system. And, it's really a close run thing, but if we can win in 2022, take back the Congress, we can at least forestall the really bad things from happening. And then hopefully in 2024, we get Trump or another person like Trump who can begin to restore our nation. And he was destroyed by the left precisely because they saw him as an existential threat to their agenda, which they had thought was going to be sealed with the 2016 election. And now they're finally, not only that, they're finally, the American people, the sleeping giant is suddenly waking up, and they're afraid. So they're afraid, and then at the same time, they smell blood in the water. So they are really working viciously overtime, and we have to do the same thing.
Yeah, amen. Couldn't agree more. Jim, what's the best place to get your book? Who Was Karl Marx? The Men, the Motives, and the Menace behind today's rampaging American left. What's the best place to get that, Jim?
Well, the easiest place is to go to my archive page, which is crisisnow.net, crisisnow.net. And I mean, I have archives of many of my articles there as well, but I have a link to the Amazon page that will take you directly to the Karl Marx book, which is available in both Kindle and print.
Excellent. Jim, thank you so much.
Okay.
So we can get it direct from Amazon too, huh? All right, excellent. So who was Karl Marx, guys? The men, the motives, and the menace behind today's rampaging American left. Jim knows his stuff, folks. He has been studying this stuff for a long time. As you just heard here, he has a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom in these areas. So get the book, get the word out, share this video out, educate your friends. He's not exaggerating when he says that if these people are victorious, it is going to be a catastrophe like nothing that people alive have seen in the United States. So, Jim, thank you for being with us, folks. Thank you for watching. God bless you all.